Breaking news, the war against ISIS inside Syria begins. A powerful display by sea and by air, pounding the terror group's home base, aiming to destroy its command and control structure. And the U.S. not doing it alone. In a historic shift, 5 Arab nations participating in the strikes.
This is much bigger than anything we've seen so far.
Thwarted attack. The U.S. also hitting a group of al-Qaeda veterans inside Syria, saying a potential attack against the U.S. was stopped. How real was the threat? This as President Obama heads to the United Nations today. We have all angles covered this morning.
A special edition of New Day starts right now. We're following breaking news, what could be ongoing airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. We have new video for you of the airstrikes that have been carried out so far. Again, inside Syria. This is the new wave in the war against ISIS. These are fighter jets, obviously, taking off from the USS George H.W. Bush to hit terror targets. We're learning that U.S. officials launched strikes overnight against a network of al-Qaeda-linked terrorists known as the Khorasan Group. Not just ISIS, al-Qaeda as well. Not a coalition, just the U.S. alone. Why? Because they were actively plotting against the U.S. homeland. What does all this mean? What will happen next? Retired Lieutenant Colonel James Reese joins us now. He's a former Delta Force officer, along with David Gartenstein-Ross, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Let's start with this U.S.-specific headline here. ISIS, we were expecting this. But against al-Qaeda in Syria, was this a real threat? Was this just to stop their planning of the threat? What's your gut on it?
I absolutely believe this is a real threat. The U.S. has gotten very good at manhunting over the last 14 years. And both SOCOM, CENTCOM, the Pentagon, there's people that are doing this all the time for these key leaders, which we used to call high-value targets. So that high-value target element is still out there hunting these people down.
And David, when we're taking a look at the targets that were picked, and again, including al-Qaeda in what was, spoken about as an ISIS-exclusive mission, this is all about actually having permission to do anything inside Syria, right? This is about taking the opportunity for the United States?
I think part of the concern was that the Khorasan group might have served as a retaliatory capability. One thing we know about ISIS is that although they're a very potent military force, they're also very limited in terms of their ability to strike internationally with terrorist attacks, whereas the Khorasan group seems to have been far more advanced. Part of the fear, I think, on the U.S.'s part is that as the U.S. struck at ISIS, especially as it degraded the leadership, the Khorasan group might have tried to strike back at the West in order to regain some of al-Qaeda's momentum in its competition with ISIS.
And, you're talking about it, James, and you're saying that this Khorasan manhunting, because this is somewhat of their all-star team, right, as we heard Tom Fuentes saying early. We're going to show you, as I'm sitting up here with James, you're going to be seeing some of the after effects of the bombing against the Khorasan group. That's what you see. This is not just file footage for you. This is after effects of people on the ground looking through what happened after these attacks in northwestern Syria around Aleppo against a group called Khorasan. They are seen again as this all-star team of al-Qaeda. The reason given by the United States for these United States-only attacks, the coalition not involved here, was because of what they saw was imminent threat or imminent threat plotting against the U.S. And again, this idea of the U.S. couldn't have done this before because there was no mandate to go into Syria. So now that that has been broached and it's okay to be there, who knows what they'll do.
The second and third order effects of going into Syria are huge. This really starts shaping the operations for future operations. Even though we can't get boots on the ground, being able to cross that red line is huge for us, especially for the U.S. and for the other coalition partners.
Important reference there. We remember here in the U.S. all the talk, David, about crossing the red line. The president at first slow, then he wanted to go and bomb in Syria, then the Congress wasn't with him, and now it has finally happened. And when we look at the spots that are being picked, at least early on, and what the U.S. is saying, this is the impressive phase of this. We're going after the big targets first. One of them, an oil refinery. One of the unspoken stories here regarding ISIS is the fact that they sell oil on the black market and lots of people are buying it. So why was this effective and what do we have to follow through in this situation?
The reason why is to try to dry up some of their sources of funding. This organization has been operating in this kind of nether region where it's not quite a terrorist group, it's not quite an insurgency, and it's not quite a state. Part of sustaining its position is to sustain the financial wealth that it's managed to gain, and that's part of what the United States is trying to do right now, to set it back in that regard.
Who's buying the oil? Don't you have to move on that front also?
Well, it's being sold on the black market, and that makes it very difficult to prevent them from selling the oil because they're, in part because they're selling it illegally, they're selling it at prices that are far, far below market value. As long as the black market is vibrant, and it's quite strong in this area, it's going to be very difficult to shut down the buyers.
I'm always a little suspicious of that. I feel like money always talks, James, and somebody's buying that oil. We know that a lot of these countries, many who are joining the coalition, kind of play both sides of the fence when it comes to ISIS, have groups within their own borders that are funding them. That'll have to be addressed. But today is about military action. Timing is important. People are saying, why didn't the president wait? He's at the UN General Assembly this week. It's not just about what the U.S. and the coalition does. It's about what ISIS is doing. What are they doing right now?
Well, ISIS right now, I believe, we talked about this last night, they were the bullies on the battlefield. They've been punched in the nose. So now they're like, it's a wake-up call for them, which I think is great. I think it's a wake-up call that the 5 coalition partners are all these Arab countries. It's great, again, for us and for the region. And ISIS right now has really got to take a hard look at what they're going to do. They're trying to move their equipment of what's left of it right now. And they'll start, what I believe will start happening is if they can't move, they'll start blending back in with the society and the folks regionally.
And that's why the timing is of the essence as much as it is, right? Because it's one thing to make a video with someone who has their hands tied behind their back and look like a tough guy with a mask on your face. But when you have the might of the U.S. military and its friends coming after you, maybe you'll run and hide.
Absolutely. Remember, al-Baghdadi, we caught him in 2004, the leader of ISIS, and he knows this. He was a Zarqawi guy. And, he got hunted for a long time. But he knows that he was able to have a safe haven out there in western Syria. Now that safe haven is taken away.
And as clear as it may seem now, David, to be honest, there was real skepticism about whether or not there would be the coalition that would allow the U.S. to initiate real military attacks, especially inside Syria. Now that that's going on, what kind of future targets do you think you see in this next wave?
It's an interesting question. I think that part of the plan is to try to eliminate as many targets at top echelons as possible. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if the next round weren't inside Iraq. One thing I'd say, though, about the coalition is there's still a question as to what role the various countries are playing. There's this very vague word of participation or partners being used. We know that Jordanian planes were over Syrian airspace, but it's not clear how many of them were actually involved in bombing roles as opposed to roles that are a bit more symbolic. I think this is being played up as much as possible for strategic reasons.
But the bottom line is the airstrikes have begun. The war is now in earnest inside Syria, and there's major bombing going on as we speak. So we'll be following it for you throughout the morning. We want to thank James Reese and David Gartenstein-Ross. Thank you very much for your perspective, gentlemen. We'll need you here this morning.